The first time Wyatt Morrison found herself crumpled beside the cottonwood tree, blood staining her skirts and tears streaming down her face. She thought she would die there alone in the California wilderness, just outside San Francisco in 1875. The pain that month had been worse than any before, twisting through her abdomen like hot iron brands, and she had stumbled away from the boarding house where she worked as a seamstress, desperate for privacy in her agony. She had made it perhaps a mile before her legs gave out, and there she sat, pressing her back against the rough bark, trying to breathe through the waves of cramping that made her vision blur. She heard the horse before she saw the rider. Through the haze of pain, she registered hoofbeats slowing, then stopping. Boot steps approached through the dry grass. Wyatt tried to compose herself, to wipe away the tears and straighten her spine, but another cramp seized her and she gasped, doubling over. The cowboy crouched down a few feet away, not too close, not invading her space. She could see his dusty boots, the frayed hem of his denim trousers. When she finally managed to look up, she saw a young man, perhaps 23 or 24, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of whiskey. His hat shadowed his face, but she could see the concern there, mixed with something else. Not pity. Understanding, maybe. He did not ask if she was all right. He did not ask what was wrong. He did not offer empty reassurances or tell her to smile or suggest she was being dramatic. Instead, he settled down in the grass about 6 feet from her, close enough that she knew she was not alone, far enough that she did not feel crowded. He pulled his canteen from his belt and set it on the ground between them, within her reach. Then he tipped his hat down over his eyes and leaned back against a rock, as if he had all the time in the world and nowhere else to be. They sat like that for nearly an hour. Wyatt cried quietly, riding out the waves of pain, and the cowboy sat in companionable silence, not watching her but not leaving either. When she finally reached for the canteen with a shaking hand, he shifted slightly so his body blocked the view from the road, giving her even more privacy. She drank deeply, the water cool and clean, and when she set it down, he nudged it back toward her with his boot. Eventually, the worst passed. Wyatt wiped her face with her sleeve and took several steadying breaths. The cowboy stood, dusted off his pants, and walked back to his horse. He mounted up, touched 2 fingers to the brim of his hat in a small salute, and rode away without a single word. Wyatt sat there for another 10 minutes, staring after him, wondering if she had imagined the whole thing. But the next month, when the pain came again and she found herself stumbling toward that same cottonwood tree, because at least there she had felt less alone, he was there. She arrived to find him already sitting beneath the tree, his horse grazing nearby. He looked up as she approached, recognizing her immediately, and simply nodded toward the space beside the tree. She sank down, and he moved to his position 6 feet away, creating that bubble of privacy and protection without making her feel watched or judged. This time she noticed more about him. His hands were calloused and scarred, the hands of a man who worked hard. His shirt was clean but patched in places. His horse was a sturdy buckskin mare, well cared for. He wore a gun on his hip, but his hand never strayed near it. He had a kind face, she decided, even though it was weathered beyond his years. The kind of face that had seen hardship but had not let it turn him cruel. When the pain ebbed, she found her voice. "Thank you," she whispered. He tilted his head in acknowledgement but said nothing. Then he stood, mounted his horse, and left just as he had before. The 3rd month, Wyatt realized he was waiting for her. She had tried to fight through the pain at the boarding house, embarrassed by the pattern that was forming, but eventually it became unbearable and she fled. She made her way to the cottonwood tree, half hoping and half dreading that he would be there. He was. This time, She noticed he had brought an extra blanket, which he spread on the ground near the tree before retreating to his usual spot. She sank onto it gratefully, the soft wool better than the hard earth and sharp grass. She wanted to ask him why he was doing this, how he knew to be here, what his name was, but the questions died in her throat as another cramp seized her. Instead, she focused on breathing, on surviving, and on the quiet comfort of his presence. By the 6th month, it had become a ritual. Wyatt knew the date would come, knew the pain would follow, and knew she could make it to the cottonwood tree where someone would be waiting. She stopped trying to hide it at the boarding house. She simply told Mrs. Chen, the proprietor, that she needed a few hours once a month, and Mrs. Chen, who had seen enough of life to recognize female troubles, agreed without prying. The cowboy was always there first. Sometimes he brought the blanket. Sometimes he brought chamomile tea in a tin cup that stayed warm for the first little while. Once he brought a smooth river stone that held heat, wrapped in cloth, and set it near her. She clutched it to her abdomen and felt the warmth ease some of the cramping. He never spoke. She began to understand that his silence was a gift. There were no awkward questions to answer, no need to explain or justify her pain. He simply bore witness to it, acknowledged it as real and valid by his presence, and that was enough. More than enough. Wyatt was 19 years old and had been alone for most of her life. Her parents had died of fever when she was 14, and she had made her way west from Missouri through a series of domestic positions, saving every penny until she could afford the passage to California. She had heard San Francisco was a place where a woman could make her own way, and the boarding house had hired her for her neat stitching and quick fingers. She mended clothes, took in alterations, and embroidered initials on handkerchiefs for the businessmen in the city. It was a living, if a modest one. But she had no family, no close friends. The other women at the boarding house were cordial but busy with their own lives. And every month, the pain came, a reminder of her body's rhythms, of her isolation, of all the things that women were supposed to suffer silently and alone, until the cowboy. On the 8th month, she finally asked, "What's your name?" He was sitting against his rock, hat pulled low. At her question, he looked up. For a long moment, she thought he would not answer. Then, in a voice rough from disuse, he said, Rhett Carson." "Wyatt Morrison," she replied, and even through the pain, she managed a small smile. He touched his hat brim. "Miss Morrison, why do you do this?" She asked. "Come here, wait for me." Rhett was quiet for so long she thought he would not answer. Then he said, "My sister, Emily. She suffered the same. Our mother was dead and our father did not understand. She would hide in the barn crying and I would sit outside the door. So she knew someone was there, someone who cared. Where is she now? Died 3 years back, fever. I'm sorry." He nodded once, accepting her condolence. Then he fell silent again, and Wyatt understood. He was honoring his sister's memory by helping her. By being the presence that said, "You are not alone. Your pain is real. I see you." After that, they spoke a little more each month, never during the worst of it. Rhett seemed to have an instinct for when the pain was at its peak, and during those times he maintained his respectful distance and silence. But afterward, when Wyatt had recovered enough to sit up straight and drink water and breathe normally, they would exchange a few words. She learned that he worked at a ranch about 10 miles outside the city, breaking horses and mending fences. He had a small cabin on the property and kept mostly to himself. He had been in California for 5 years, had come from Kansas originally. He was 24 years old. He liked his work but found the solitude suited him. He read when he could get books, mostly newspapers that were weeks old and occasional dime novels. She told him about her seamstress work, about the strange requests she sometimes received. A woman who wanted her wedding dress embroidered with bees. A man who wanted his shirt monogrammed with his horse's name instead of his own. She told him about Mrs. Chen's cooking, which was the best Wyatt had ever tasted, and about the fog that rolled in from the bay every evening like a living thing. The conversations were brief, never more than 15 minutes, but they began to matter to Wyatt. She found herself thinking about what she would tell Rhett as the month passed. She noticed things differently, collecting stories like flowers to present to him. By the time a year had passed since that first meeting under the cottonwood, Wyatt had to admit to herself that she looked forward to seeing Rhett Carson. Not because of the pain, which was still awful, but because of what came after. Because of his quiet presence and his careful kindness, and the way he saw her as a person, not just a woman in distress. In the 14th month, something changed. The pain was particularly bad that day, worse than usual, and Wyatt could not stop crying. Not the quiet tears she usually shed, but great racking sobs that shook her whole body. She was embarrassed, mortified, but she could not control it. Rhett did something he had never done before. He moved closer. Not right beside her, but close enough that she could have reached out and touched him if she wanted. He sat down in the grass, and in a low voice, he began to talk. Not to her exactly, but into the air, as if he were telling a story to the wind. He talked about the ranch where he worked. About a foal that had been born the previous week, all gangly legs and curiosity. About the way the hills turned gold in summer and green in winter. About a hawk he had seen hunting, so precise and perfect in its dive. His voice was steady and calm, a low rumble that gave Wyatt something to focus on besides the pain. She closed her eyes and listened, and somehow it helped. When he finished the story about the hawk, he started another one, about a cattle drive he had been on years ago. Then another, about learning to play poker from a grizzled old cowboy named Dutch. He talked for over an hour, his voice never wavering, giving her an anchor in the storm of pain. When it finally passed and Wyatt opened her eyes, she found Rhett looking at her with such gentle concern that her breath caught. "Thank you," she managed. "Seemed like you needed a distraction," he said simply. After that day, Wyatt could no longer pretend that what she felt for Rhett Carson was simple gratitude. It was something deeper, something that bloomed in her chest every time she thought of him. But she did not know if he felt the same, and she was afraid to ask, afraid to ruin the one good thing she had. In the 16th month, Rhett brought something new. When Wyatt arrived at the cottonwood tree, she found him there as always, but this time there was a small package wrapped in brown paper beside the blanket. She looked at him questioningly. "Willow bark tea," he explained. "The woman at the apothecary said it helps with pain. Thought you might try it next time before you come out here. Might take the edge off." Wyatt picked up the package, feeling the weight of it, and something inside her cracked open. This was not just the act of a man honoring his sister's memory. This was the act of a man who thought about her when she was not there, who had gone into town, into an apothecary, and asked about remedies for women's pain, probably embarrassing himself in the process, who cared enough to try to ease her suffering. "Rhett," she said softly. He met her eyes, and she saw the uncertainty there, the fear that he had overstepped. "Thank you," she said. "This is the kindest thing anyone has ever done for me." Something in his expression eased. He nodded, and they fell into their usual pattern, but Wyatt clutched the package of willow bark tea like it was a love letter. Because in a way, it was. She tried the tea the following month. It did help, dulling the sharpest edges of the pain so that when she made her way to the cottonwood tree, she could walk upright instead of hunched over. Rhett noticed immediately. "The tea worked?" he asked. "Some," she admitted. "It's still bad, but not as bad." He looked pleased, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Wyatt realized she had never seen him truly smile before, and she found herself wanting to see it again. As the months continued, they began to talk more. The visits stretched longer. Sometimes, after the pain had passed, Wyatt would stay for an extra hour, sitting beneath the cottonwood tree with Rhett, just talking. He told her about his childhood in Kansas, about his father who had been a farmer, about Emily who had been bright and funny and full of life, until the fever took her. Wyatt told him about her own parents, about the journey west, about her dreams of one day owning her own dress shop. "You could do it," Rhett said. "You are good at what you do. I have seen the work you bring with you sometimes, the embroidery. It is beautiful." Wyatt flushed with pleasure at the compliment. She had been stitching a pillowcase for Mrs. Chen, working on it during her breaks, and she had brought it with her the previous month. She had not realized Rhett had noticed. "It would take a lot of money," she said. "More than I have." "You will save it," Rhett said with confidence. "You are determined, I can see it in you." In the 20th month, it rained. Not a light drizzle, but a heavy downpour that soaked through clothes in seconds. Wyatt arrived at the cottonwood tree shivering and miserable, the pain compounded by the cold. Rhett took one look at her and made a decision. "Come on," he said, standing and offering his hand. "My cabin is not far. You cannot stay out here in this." Wyatt hesitated. It was one thing to meet him under a tree, quite another to go to his home. But another wave of pain and cold washed over her, and she took his hand. His cabin was small but tidy, a single room with a stove, a bed, a table, and a few shelves. Rhett got the fire going immediately while Wyatt stood dripping on the floor. He pulled a dry shirt and a blanket from a trunk and handed them to her. "Change behind the curtain," he said, nodding to a corner where a piece of canvas hung. "I will turn around." She did as he said, peeling off her wet dress and shivering into his oversized shirt, then wrapping the blanket around herself. When she emerged, Rhett had his back turned, heating water on the stove. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the chair near the fire. "I will make you tea." Wyatt sat, slowly warming up. The pain was still there, but the cold had made it so much worse, and now that she was warming, it became more bearable. She looked around the cabin, taking in the details. A few books on a shelf, a photograph in a simple frame of a young woman who must have been Emily, clean dishes, mended clothes hanging on pegs. It was the home of a man who took care of himself, who had learned to be self-sufficient, but had not let loneliness make him slovenly. Rhett brought her the tea, and then sat on the edge of his bed, maintaining the distance between them even here. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the rain drum on the roof. "You take care of this place," Wyatt said eventually. "It is nice." "I try," Rhett said. "It is not much, but it is mine." "That matters," Wyatt said. "Having something that is yours." They talked for hours that day, longer than they ever had before. Wyatt stayed until long after the pain had passed, until the rain had slowed to a drizzle. Rhett walked her back to town, leading his horse while Wyatt rode, and when they reached the boarding house, he helped her down with careful hands. "See you next month," he said softly. "Yes," Wyatt agreed, and she realized she was smiling despite the exhaustion, despite everything. Mrs. Chen gave her a knowing look when she came inside, but said nothing. Wyatt went to her small room and lay down on her bed, still wrapped in Rhett's blanket, which she realized she had forgotten to return. She buried her face in the wool and breathed in the scent of him, wood smoke and leather and something else, something indefinably Rhett. And she let herself admit, fully and completely, that she was in love with him. The question was whether he felt the same. The next month, Wyatt returned the blanket, freshly washed and folded. Rhett took it with a nod of thanks. The weather was better, clear and warm, and they sat beneath the cottonwood tree as usual, but something had shifted between them. Wyatt could feel it in the air, a charge of possibility. When the pain had passed and they sat talking, Rhett said, "I have been thinking about something." "What is that?" "About you coming out here every month, walking all this way when you are in pain. It seems wrong, difficult." Wyatt felt her stomach drop. Was he telling her not to come anymore? Had she overstayed her welcome? "I was thinking," Rhett continued, not looking at her, "that maybe you should not have to walk. Maybe I could come get you. Bring you out on my horse or to the cabin if the weather is bad. It would be easier for you." "You would do that?" Wyatt asked. "I want to," Rhett said, and finally he looked at her. "I want to help however I can." "Rhett," Wyatt said, and her voice was trembling. "Why do you do this, really? I know you said it was for your sister, and I believe that was true at first, but now, why do you keep coming?" Rhett was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "At first it was for Emily, but then it was for you, because you should not have to be alone, because you are strong and kind and you deserve someone to care, because I—" He stopped, struggling with the words. "Because you what?" Wyatt prompted gently. "Because I have come to care for you," Rhett said finally. "More than I should, probably. More than is proper given the circumstances, but I cannot help it." Wyatt's heart was pounding. "I care for you too," she said. "I have for months now." "I did not know if you felt the same." Rhett looked at her with such hope and wonder that she wanted to cry. "You do?" "Yes," she said simply. "Then may I court you?" Rhett asked. "Properly, not just meeting like this. I want to call on you at the boarding house, take you to dinner, walk with you in the evening. I want to know you in all the ways, not just in your pain." "I would like that very much," Wyatt said, and she was smiling so hard her cheeks hurt. Rhett smiled back, that full smile she had glimpsed before, and it transformed his face. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand in his. His palm was warm and rough, his grip gentle. "I will come by on Sunday," he said, "if that is all right with you." Sunday would be perfect. That Sunday, Rhett arrived at the boarding house in clean clothes, his hair neatly combed, holding a small bouquet of wildflowers. Mrs. Chen answered the door, looked him up and down, and then called for Wyatt with barely suppressed amusement. Wyatt came downstairs in her best dress, a blue cotton one with white lace at the collar that she had sewn herself. Rhett's eyes widened when he saw her. "You look beautiful," he said. "Thank you," Wyatt said, blushing. "You look very handsome." They walked through San Francisco together, talking easily now that the formality of courtship had been established. Rhett told her more about his work, about his dreams of one day owning his own ranch. Wyatt told him about the dress shop she hoped to open, about the designs she sketched in her spare time. They had dinner at a modest restaurant near the waterfront, and Rhett insisted on paying despite Wyatt's protests. Afterward, they walked along the bay as the fog rolled in, and Rhett offered her his jacket when she shivered. "I want to do this right," Rhett said as they walked. "I know we met under strange circumstances, but I want you to know that I respect you. That I see you as more than someone who needs help." "I know that," Wyatt said. "I have always known that. You never made me feel weak or pitiable. You just made me feel seen." "You are the strongest person I know," Rhett said. "The way you handle that pain every month, the way you keep going. It is remarkable." They began courting properly after that. Rhett came by every Sunday, and they would spend the day together. Sometimes they walked through the city. Sometimes they took his horse out into the countryside. Sometimes they simply sat in the boarding house parlor and talked while Mrs. Chen kept a weather eye on them from the kitchen. And every month when Wyatt's time came, Rhett was there. But now it was different. Now he would collect her from the boarding house, riding through the streets in the early morning before anyone else was about. He would take her to his cabin, where the fire was always lit and the tea was always ready. He would settle her in the chair with blankets and pillows, and he would stay close by, talking to her when she needed distraction, sitting in companionable silence when she did not. The pain was still awful, but it was bearable now, because she was not alone, because Rhett loved her. He said it for the first time on a cool evening in October, 6 months after they had started courting officially. They were sitting on the porch of his cabin, watching the sun set over the hills. Wyatt was leaning against his shoulder, his arm around her waist. "I love you," Rhett said quietly. "I have for a long time. I wanted you to know." Wyatt turned to look at him, her heart so full she thought it might burst. "I love you too," she said. "So much." Rhett kissed her then, soft and gentle and full of promise. When they broke apart, both of them were smiling. "Will you marry me?" Rhett asked. "I know I do not have much, just the cabin and my work and a few savings, but I will work hard for you. I will give you everything I can. And one day, I promise, we will have that dress shop. I will make sure of it." "Yes," Wyatt said without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you." They were married in December of 1876 in a small ceremony at a church in San Francisco. Mrs. Chen stood as Wyatt's witness, and Rhett's boss from the ranch, a gruff man named Samuel, stood as his. Wyatt wore a dress she had made herself, white cotton with delicate blue embroidery along the hem and sleeves. Rhett wore his best suit, brushed clean and pressed. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Rhett kissed her with such tenderness that Wyatt felt tears prick her eyes. They were happy tears, joyful tears, so different from the ones she had shed alone under the cottonwood tree. They moved into Rhett's cabin together, and Wyatt continued her seamstress work, now taking commissions from home. Rhett continued at the ranch but began saving more seriously, putting aside every spare penny toward their shared dream. Marriage suited them. They settled into an easy rhythm, waking together, working during the day, coming together in the evening to share meals and conversation. Rhett was an attentive husband, thoughtful and kind. He helped with the housework without being asked, cooked breakfast on Sundays, and always made sure Wyatt had everything she needed for her sewing. And every month, when her time came, he was there. It was no longer a secret rendezvous under a tree, but a part of their life together. Rhett would clear his schedule, stay home from work, and take care of her. He would make the willow bark tea, heat the stones, and sit with her for as long as it took. Sometimes he read to her from the newspaper or a book. Sometimes he told her stories. Sometimes he simply held her hand and sat in silence. "I am glad we met the way we did," Wyatt told him one evening after a particularly difficult month had passed. "I know it was born out of pain, but I would not change it." "Neither would I," Rhett said. "You have given me more happiness than I ever thought possible." 2 years into their marriage, Rhett came home with news. Samuel was retiring and selling off portions of the ranch. There was a small parcel of land, about 40 acres, that Rhett could afford if he pooled all their savings. "It would mean no dress shop for a while," Rhett said hesitantly. "We would have to start over, build everything from scratch, but it would be ours. We could have our own place, raise horses, maybe cattle, and eventually we would still save for the shop. It would just take longer." Wyatt thought about it carefully. She loved the idea of the dress shop, but she loved Rhett more, and she could see the hope in his eyes, the dream of having his own land. "Let's do it," she said. "We will build it together." They bought the land in the spring of 1879. It was beautiful property, rolling hills covered in golden grass, a creek running through one corner, and a stand of oak trees near where they planned to build the house. The cabin on the property was even smaller than the one they had been living in, barely more than a shack, but it was theirs. They worked hard that first year. Rhett built a new barn with Samuel's help, and they bought their first horses, 3 mares and a stallion. Wyatt set up a sewing corner in the cabin and continued taking commissions, though fewer than before since there was so much work to be done on the land. Every month, Rhett still took care of her. No matter how busy they were, no matter what work was pressing, he stopped everything when her time came. And Wyatt loved him more for it, for the constancy of his care, for the way he never treated it as a burden. In the fall of 1879, Wyatt realized she had missed her monthly time. She waited, thinking it was simply late, but when another week passed and then another, she began to wonder. Her breasts were tender and she felt queasy in the mornings. She said nothing to Rhett at first, afraid to hope, but when a full month had passed with no sign of her cycle, she went to see the doctor in town. The doctor confirmed what she had suspected. She was with child. Wyatt rode home in a daze of joy and fear. She wanted this baby desperately, but she was also terrified. What if something went wrong? What if she was not a good mother? What if the pain she experienced every month had damaged something inside her? When she arrived home, Rhett took one look at her face and immediately came to her side. "What is wrong?" he asked. "Are you hurt?" "No," Wyatt said, and then she smiled through her tears. "I am pregnant." Rhett stared at her for a long moment, and then his face broke into the widest smile she had ever seen. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing, before carefully setting her back down. "We are going to have a baby," he said wonderingly. "A baby." "Are you happy?" Wyatt asked. "Happy." Rhett pulled her close. "I am the happiest man alive." The pregnancy was difficult at times. Wyatt suffered from terrible morning sickness for the first few months, and Rhett took over most of the cooking and cleaning. He would bring her dry toast and ginger tea in bed, rubbing her back when she was sick, never complaining. As her belly grew, Wyatt found she could not do as much of the physical work around the ranch, but she threw herself into sewing. She made baby clothes, tiny gowns and blankets, embroidered with flowers and animals. She made new curtains for the cabin and a quilt for their bed. Rhett marveled at her skill, at the way her hands could create such beauty. "Our child will be so loved," he said one evening, his hand on her swollen belly. "So very loved." Wyatt went into labor on a warm day in June of 1880. Rhett had ridden to town to fetch the midwife, an experienced woman named Mrs. Kowalski, and she arrived just as the contractions were getting serious. The labor was long and hard, nearly 18 hours, and there were moments when Wyatt thought she could not do it, could not push any more. But Rhett was there, holding her hand, wiping her face with a cool cloth, telling her she was strong, she could do this, he believed in her. And finally, as the sun was setting, their daughter was born. She was small and perfect, with a tuft of dark hair and Rhett's whiskey-colored eyes. She cried lustily, announcing her presence to the world, and when the midwife placed her in Wyatt's arms, Wyatt felt a love so fierce and overwhelming that she could barely breathe. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "We have been waiting for you." Rhett was crying openly, tears streaming down his face as he looked at his wife and daughter. "She is perfect," he said. "You are both perfect." They named her Emily Rose Carson after Rhett's sister and Wyatt's mother. Emily was a good baby, fussy at times but mostly content. She nursed well and slept in stretches, and both Wyatt and Rhett fell completely in love with her. Watching Rhett with Emily was a revelation. He was so gentle with her, so patient. He would walk her around the cabin when she cried, singing to her in his rough voice, and she would calm immediately. He changed her nappies without complaint, rocked her to sleep, and stared at her for long minutes as if he could not quite believe she was real. "You are a wonderful father," Wyatt told him one evening as she watched him cradle Emily. "I want her to know she is loved," Rhett said simply. "Always. No matter what." When Emily was 3 months old, Wyatt's monthly cycle returned. She felt the familiar cramping and dread, wondering how she would manage caring for a baby while dealing with the pain. But Rhett stepped in seamlessly. He took Emily for the day, caring for her completely, bringing her to Wyatt only when she needed to nurse. He made the willow bark tea, heated the stones, and kept everything running while Wyatt recovered. "I could not do this without you," Wyatt said gratefully. "You will never have to," Rhett replied. Life on the ranch was hard work but deeply satisfying. The horses they bred gained a reputation for being well-trained and reliable, and Rhett's business grew steadily. Wyatt took in less sewing work now that she had Emily to care for, but she still did some, mostly for the families of nearby ranchers. When Emily was 2 years old, Wyatt became pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, and in the spring of 1883 they welcomed a son. They named him William after Wyatt's father, and he was a sturdy baby with Wyatt's dark curls and a sunny disposition. Their family was complete now, or so they thought. Rhett expanded the cabin into a proper house, adding 2 bedrooms and a larger kitchen. The ranch continued to prosper. Emily and William grew healthy and happy, running wild on the land, learning to ride almost before they could walk. Wyatt had not forgotten her dream of a dress shop, but she found that she did not mind the delay. Her life was full and rich in ways she had never imagined during those lonely years in San Francisco. She had a husband who loved her deeply, children who filled her heart, and a home that was truly theirs. But Rhett had not forgotten. In 1885, when the ranch was well established and bringing in steady income, he sat Wyatt down at the kitchen table. "I have been thinking," he said, "about your dress shop." "Rhett, we have talked about this," Wyatt said. "We need the money for the ranch for the children." "The ranch is doing well," Rhett countered, "and I have been saving. Not enough for a shop in San Francisco, but maybe something in town, a small place. You could start small and grow." Wyatt stared at him. "Are you serious?" "I have never been more serious about anything," Rhett said. "You gave up your dream for mine. You have worked just as hard as I have to build this place. You deserve to have what you want." Wyatt felt tears welling up. "I have what I want, you, the children, this life. But you could have this too," Rhett said softly. "Please, let me do this for you." They began looking at properties in the nearby town of Millfield, about 5 miles from their ranch. It was a growing community, large enough to support businesses but small enough that everyone knew each other. They found a small storefront on Main Street, perfect for a dress shop. It needed work, but Rhett and some of their neighbors pitched in to help renovate. By the fall of 1885, Morrison's dress shop opened its doors. Wyatt sold ready-made dresses and took custom orders for wedding gowns, ball gowns, and everyday wear. She displayed her embroidery work and offered monogramming services. The shop was small but beautifully appointed, with Wyatt's careful touch evident in every detail. The business grew slowly but steadily. Women came from all over the county to see Wyatt's work, drawn by her skill and fair prices. She hired a young woman named Sarah to help mind the shop a few days a week, which allowed her to still spend time at home with the children. Rhett was proud of her, bragging about his wife's shop to anyone who would listen. On Sundays, the whole family would go to church together and then walk through town, often stopping by the shop so Wyatt could show Rhett her latest projects. And every month, without fail, when Wyatt's time came, Rhett closed the shop and took care of her. He never complained, never acted as though it were an inconvenience. It was simply part of their life, part of their rhythm. "You remember that first day?" Wyatt asked him one afternoon as they sat together after a particularly painful month had passed. "Under the cottonwood tree." "I remember," Rhett said. "I thought you were the bravest person I had ever seen. sitting there alone dealing with that pain, not asking for help. I did not know how to ask, Wyatt admitted. I had been alone for so long. You are not alone anymore, Rhett said, kissing her forehead. You will never be alone again. As the years passed, the ranch and the shop both thrived. Emily grew into a bright, curious girl who loved the horses and often helped her father in the barn. William was more bookish, preferring to spend time reading or helping his mother in the shop, carefully organizing spools of thread and buttons. In 1888, Wyatt's cycle stopped for good. She was 32 years old, and the doctor told her it was early but not unheard of. Wyatt felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness. Relief that the pain was over, sadness for what it represented, the end of her childbearing years. How do you feel about it? Rhett asked when she told him. I am not sure, Wyatt admitted. Relieved mostly, but also strange. That part of my life defined so much for so long. It brought us together, Rhett said. I will always be grateful for that. I suppose in a way it was a gift, Wyatt said. A painful gift, but a gift nonetheless. Without it, we might never have met. You might never have stopped that first day. I would like to think we would have found each other eventually, Rhett said. But I am glad it happened the way it did. I am glad I got to be there for you. They planted a tree that spring, an oak sapling, in the spot where they had first met near the cottonwood. It was their way of honoring what they had been through, what had brought them together. For Emily, Rhett said as he patted down the earth around the sapling, and for us, the children grew. Emily fell in love with a young rancher named Thomas at the age of 18, and they were married in 1891. William went to college in San Francisco to study law, returning home during summers and holidays. The ranch continued to prosper, and the dress shop became a beloved institution in Millfield. Rhett and Wyatt grew older together, their love deepening with each passing year. They took walks in the evening, hand in hand, talking about their day, their children, their dreams. They celebrated anniversaries and birthdays, weathered droughts and hard winters, and through it all, they remained each other's anchor. In 1895, Emily gave birth to her first child, a daughter she named Wyatt Rose, and Rhett and Wyatt became grandparents. Holding their granddaughter for the first time, Wyatt felt a rush of emotion so powerful it took her breath away. Look at what we made, she whispered to Rhett. Look at this family. I am looking, Rhett said, his arm around her, and I am grateful every single day. William married a few years later to a smart woman named Catherine he had met in San Francisco. They moved back to Millfield, and William opened a law practice in town. He and Catherine gave Wyatt and Rhett 2 grandsons, and the family continued to grow. As Rhett and Wyatt entered their 50s, they began to slow down. The ranch was run primarily by hired hands now, though Rhett still supervised and helped when he could. Wyatt reduced her hours at the shop, letting Sarah and a new hire named Margaret handle most of the day-to-day operations. They spent more time together, just the two of them, enjoying the quiet after years of raising children and building businesses. They would sit on the porch in the evenings, watching the sunset over the hills, and talk about everything and nothing. You have any regrets? Wyatt asked one evening. Rhett thought about it carefully. No, he said finally. I wish I could have given you more, given you everything you ever wanted, but I do not regret any of it. Do you? Not a single thing, Wyatt said. You gave me everything that mattered: love, partnership, family. A life worth living. We built a good life, Rhett agreed. Together. In 1905, they celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary. Emily and Thomas hosted a party at their ranch, and the whole family gathered. Children and grandchildren, friends from town, neighbors from the surrounding ranches. It was a beautiful celebration, full of laughter and love. Rhett stood and gave a toast. 30 years ago, I married the love of my life, he said. I was a simple cowboy with not much to offer except my heart and my willingness to work hard. But Wyatt saw something in me worth loving, and she has made every day since the best day of my life. To my wife, my partner, my everything. Everyone raised their glasses and Wyatt wiped away happy tears. Later, when they had a moment alone, she pulled Rhett aside. "Thank you," she said. "For everything. For that first day under the cottonwood tree when you could have ridden past but you stopped. For every month after that when you showed up and said exactly the right nothing. For loving me through the pain and beyond it. For building this life with me." "Thank you for letting me," Rhett said. "Thank you for trusting me, for loving me, for giving me a family and a purpose. You made me a better man, Wyatt. You made everything better." They kissed then, soft and sweet, and around them their family cheered. As they entered their 60s, Rhett's health began to decline. He developed a cough that would not go away, and the doctor diagnosed him with a lung condition, likely from years of working with horses and dust. He grew weaker, and Wyatt took over more of his care, just as he had cared for her all those years. She made him tea, kept him warm, sat with him for hours. She read to him from the newspaper and books, told him stories, and held his hand. And through it all, Rhett smiled. "You are too good to me," he said one day. "I am only doing what you did for me," Wyatt replied. "Being there, caring." "I would do it all again," Rhett said. "Every moment. So would I." Rhett passed away in the spring of 1910, surrounded by his family. He was 59 years old. Wyatt held his hand as he took his last breath, and she whispered, "I love you. Thank you for finding me. Thank you for staying." The grief was immense, a weight that settled over Wyatt like a heavy blanket. She had lost her partner, her best friend, the man who had seen her at her worst and loved her anyway. But she was not alone. Emily and William were there, and the grandchildren, and the community they had built. The oak tree they had planted all those years ago had grown tall and strong, its branches spreading wide. Wyatt would sit beneath it sometimes, thinking about that first day under the cottonwood, about the cowboy who had stopped and said nothing and changed her life forever. She lived another 15 years, long enough to see great-grandchildren born, to watch the ranch and the shop continue to thrive. She told stories about Rhett to anyone who would listen, keeping his memory alive. And when she finally passed away in 1925 at the age of 69, it was peacefully in her sleep, with a smile on her face. They buried her next to Rhett, under the shade of the oak tree they had planted together. And on her headstone, Emily made sure to include the words Wyatt had said so many times over the years. "He found me. He stayed. He loved me." The ranch and the shop were passed down through the generations, and the story of Wyatt and Rhett became a family legend. The story of a woman who suffered alone and a cowboy who saw her pain and chose to bear witness to it. Who said nothing because nothing needed to be said. Who showed up, month after month, not to fix or solve but simply to be present. It was a love story born in pain but built on compassion and understanding. A love that grew slowly and steadily, rooted in kindness and respect. A love that lasted a lifetime and beyond, echoing through the generations that followed. And every spring, when the oak tree bloomed, the family would gather beneath its branches and remember. They would tell the story again, of the woman who wept alone and the cowboy who found her every time. Of the power of presence, the gift of silence, the beauty of love that asks for nothing but gives everything. It was a story worth telling, worth remembering. Because in the end, that is what love is, showing up, staying. Choosing each other, again and again, through pain and joy and everything in between. Building a life together, one small moment at a time, until those moments become years and those years become a lifetime. And that is exactly what Wyatt Morrison and Rhett Carson did. They built a lifetime of love, starting with silence under a cottonwood tree and ending with a family that stretched across generations. They proved that the smallest acts of kindness, the quietest gestures of care, can change everything. They proved that sometimes saying exactly the right nothing is the most powerful thing you can do.